I caught my wife's affair on video, but what I found shocked me to the core. I've always prided myself on being a man who trusts easily. Simone and I had been married for 7 years, and I had no reason to doubt her. At least, not at first. But lately, things have changed. Simone's laughter wasn't as warm as it used to be, and there was a new distance between us, one that felt like a wall I couldn't climb. I brushed off my suspicions for months, telling myself I was imagining things. But when I noticed her constantly hiding her phone, my gut told me something was wrong. She started working late, often claiming she needed me time after work to de-stress. The familiar routine we once had, dinners together, watching TV on the couch, was slipping away. The more I tried to bridge the gap between us, the more she withdrew. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind her absences and secretive behavior. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. One night, I followed her. My heart was pounding as I watched her car pull away from our driveway. I kept a safe distance as she drove through the streets, not heading towards her usual yoga class like she said. Instead, she took a route I didn't recognize. Anxiety twisted in my gut, but I couldn't turn back now. I had to know the truth. After nearly half an hour of tailing her, she pulled into a parking lot of a downtown bar. I parked a block away, my palms slick with sweat as I watched her get out of the car, her expression unreadable. I followed her in, sticking to the shadows, heart racing. My mind was spinning with possibilities, none of them good. What was she doing here? I spotted her at the bar, talking to someone. My stomach dropped when I saw him. Her coworker, Greg. They were standing too close, their conversation too intimate for coworkers. She leaned in, and I could see them exchanging smiles, laughing softly as if they were the only ones in the world. It felt like a punch to the gut, but I needed proof. Solid proof. So, I pulled out my phone, activating the video, and waited. I stayed hidden in the corner of the bar, my phone camera rolling as I captured every moment. My hands were trembling, but I held steady. I watched as Simone and Greg continued their conversation, their body language screaming intimacy. His hand brushed her arm lightly, a touch that sent a surge of rage through me. I wanted to storm over there, confront them both, but I knew I had to stay calm, at least for now. Simone was laughing, her guard completely down. It was the kind of laugh I hadn't heard in months, one that used to be reserved for me. My chest tightened as I watched her lean closer to Greg, her eyes sparkling in a way they hadn't for a long time. Then, it happened. He leaned in, and their lips met. My breath caught in my throat. There it was, the proof I needed. The scene played out in slow motion, their kiss deepening as the reality of the betrayal hit me like a freight train. Everything I had feared, everything I had tried to deny, was now staring me right in the face. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one more painful than the last. I ended the recording and slipped out of the bar, my heart hammering in my chest. The cold night air hit me, but it did nothing to calm the fire burning inside me. I fumbled with my keys, barely able to get the door open to my car. Once inside, I sat there, staring blankly at the steering wheel. What was I supposed to do now? Confront her? Walk away? Every part of me wanted to burst into that bar and tear them apart, but I knew I needed to be smart. I had the proof. That was enough for now. But the ache in my chest felt unbearable. I drove back home, the silence of the car pressing in on me as the weight of the situation sank in deeper. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I had made up my mind. This wasn't going to end in a confrontation at a bar. No, I was going to handle this differently. I needed to know more. How long had this been going on? How deep did this betrayal run? I parked the car and sat in the dark for what felt like hours, running through everything in my head. Simone hadn't returned yet, but I wasn't surprised. She had probably gone back to his place, leaving me here, sitting in the remnants of our shattered life. I needed answers, and I knew how to get them. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I wasn't going to just confront her blindly. I needed more evidence, more leverage. The video from last night was only the beginning. If Simone was hiding something, I had to uncover the full extent of it. When Simone came home that morning, she acted like nothing was wrong. Her usual excuse about a late work night and needing to crash at a friend's place rolled off her tongue effortlessly. I wanted to snap, to scream at her for lying to my face, but I held it together. I nodded, forcing a smile, and told her I understood. Inside, though, I was boiling. Over the next few days, I began setting up my plan. I bought a small camera, discreet enough to hide in our house without raising suspicion. I installed it in the living room, the kitchen, and, most importantly, our bedroom. If Simone was sneaking around, I needed to catch her red-handed. I wasn't proud of spying on her, but after what I had seen, trust was out the window. Every night, she acted like nothing was wrong. She was careful, making sure not to leave any trace of her affair. But I could feel the distance between us growing. She would leave the room to take calls or disappear for hours without explanation. I could sense something was about to break. My gut told me I wasn't wrong, and I was about to find out just how far this betrayal went. Then, it happened. One evening, I told Simone I had to work late and left the house. In reality, I parked a few blocks away, monitoring the cameras from my phone. Hours went by, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But just as I was starting to wonder if tonight was the night, the door opened, and Greg walked in. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I watched him stroll into my home like he belonged there. My blood boiled as I watched them together, laughing, drinking wine, sitting on the couch as if it were just another night for them. Then, they moved upstairs to the bedroom. I had never been more grateful for those cameras. I sat there in my car, heart pounding, watching the live feed as they crossed a line no married couple should ever cross. It was surreal, like watching a nightmare unfold in real time. Except it wasn't a dream. I was wide awake. The rage was building inside me with every passing second. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and hit record, documenting everything that happened in that room. Every touch, every word, every betrayal, captured. This time, I wasn't just a helpless bystander. I had them. There would be no denying it. No excuses. No more lies. When I finally ended the recording, I sat back in my seat, drained. I could barely process what I had just witnessed. It was all too much. But now, I had all the proof I needed. The next step was clear. It was time to confront Simone. And this time, I was ready. I didn't sleep at all that night. The video played over and over in my mind, every detail etched into my brain like a scar. When morning came, I felt hollow, but I knew what I had to do. It was time to confront Simone, to finally pull the curtain back on this twisted game she'd been playing behind my back. Simone was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she made breakfast, completely unaware that her entire world was about to come crashing down. I stood there in the doorway, watching her for a moment, feeling a strange sense of detachment. This woman, my wife, the person I thought I knew better than anyone, was about to face the truth, and I was ready for it. "Simone," I said, my voice steady, though my heart pounded in my chest. She turned to look at me, smiling, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that told me she knew something was off. "Yeah?" she asked, still pretending everything was fine. "We need to talk." I stepped into the kitchen, setting my phone on the counter between us. She glanced at it, her smile faltering. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice now tinged with nervousness. I took a deep breath, my mind racing through everything I wanted to say. But instead of starting with words, I simply unlocked my phone, pulled up the video, and hit play. For a moment, Simone stood there, confused. But as the video played, her and Greg together in our bedroom, her face drained of color, she took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. "Jonathan, I can explain," she stammered, but her words were empty, hollow. There was nothing left to explain. "Explain?" I said, my voice cold and sharp. "Explain how you've been sneaking around with him behind my back? How you've been lying to me every single day?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. "Please, I didn't mean for it to happen. It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I shouted, my composure cracking. "I watched you, Simone. I watched you with him. I saw everything. Don't you dare stand there and try to twist this around." She reached out as if to touch me, but I stepped back, refusing to let her close. "How long?" I demanded. How long has this been going on? Simone looked down, unable to meet my eyes. A few months, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It just happened. Months? I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. You've been betraying me for months, and I had no idea. Her tears fell freely now, but I wasn't ready to feel sympathy. Jonathan, please. I never wanted to hurt you. It's just things between us weren't the same anymore. I felt distant, and Greg was just there. It's not like I don't love you. I laughed bitterly. Love me? If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have thrown away everything we built together for some cheap fling. Simone was sobbing now, but I was beyond caring. My anger had been simmering for too long, and it was finally boiling over. I trusted you, Simone, I said, my voice low but deadly serious. And you destroyed that. You destroyed us. She shook her head frantically. We can fix this. I swear, we can fix this. I'll stop seeing him. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't leave me. Don't walk away. But her words fell on deaf ears. There was no fixing this. Not anymore. I grabbed my phone off the counter, my decision already made. I'm done, Simone, I said, turning away from her. I'm done with you. I'm done with all of it. Her sobs followed me as I walked out the door. The door slammed behind me, and with it, the weight of years of trust, love, and the future I had envisioned with Simone. I walked to my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I couldn't stay in that house, not anymore. It wasn't my home anymore. It was the scene of a betrayal so deep, I wasn't sure I could ever recover. I drove aimlessly for hours, the streets blurring past me. The anger was still there, burning hot, but now a different kind of pain was starting to seep in. This wasn't just about Simone's betrayal. It was about the life I had lost. I had built my world around her, trusted her with everything, and now it was gone. I pulled over at a park I used to visit as a kid. It was quiet there, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I sat on a bench, staring at the playground equipment, watching families and children playing, laughing, oblivious to the devastation in my life. How had it come to this? I replayed the last few months in my head. Simone's distance, the late-night work meetings, her sudden need for space. All the signs had been there, and yet I had convinced myself that it was just a phase, that we were just going through a rough patch, as all couples did. I had never imagined she was capable of betraying me like this. I rubbed my face, feeling the weight of exhaustion pulling at me. I hadn't slept in what felt like days, and the emotional toll was starting to take its physical form. But as much as I wanted to shut down, to push the world away and escape the pain, I knew I couldn't. I had decisions to make. My life, our marriage. It was all unraveling, and I had to figure out what to do next. As I sat there, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't want to look at it. I knew it was Simone, but the buzzing continued, relentless, until I couldn't ignore it any longer. I pulled out the phone, and sure enough, it was her. Missed calls, texts, voicemails. I didn't listen to them. I didn't need to. I knew what she was going to say. She'd beg for forgiveness, promise to make things right, to be better. But no amount of pleading would change what had happened. She had destroyed the foundation of our marriage, and I didn't think there was any going back. Eventually, I stood up from the bench and walked back to my car. I couldn't sit here forever. I had to take action. There was one last place I needed to go. One last thing I needed to do to close this chapter of my life. I drove to a lawyer's office. The receptionist looked up as I entered, giving me a polite smile. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. "I need to speak with someone about filing for divorce," I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of sympathy. She nodded and handed me some paperwork, pointing me to a seat in the waiting area. As I filled out the forms, the reality of what I was doing began to settle in. This was it, the end of my marriage, the end of everything Simone and I had built together. When my name was called, I met with a lawyer who walked me through the process. It felt surreal, talking about splitting assets, selling the house, and how we would handle the logistics of separating our lives. I listened in a daze, nodding when necessary, but my mind was miles away. By the time I left the office, The paperwork had been filed. The wheels were in motion. I drove home, the sun setting on a day that felt like the end of an era. When I arrived, Simone's car was still in the driveway. I braced myself for another confrontation, knowing she wouldn't give up without a fight. But I was ready for whatever came next. I had made my decision. I took a deep breath as I stepped through the front door. The house was quiet, but I could feel the tension in the air. Simone was sitting on the couch, her eyes swollen and red from crying. She looked up at me the moment I walked in, her expression a mixture of desperation and guilt. The sight of her in that state might have broken me before, but now it only hardened my resolve. "Jonathan, please, we need to talk," she said, her voice cracking. "I made a mistake, but we can fix this. I'll do anything. Just don't leave me. Please." I stood there for a moment, looking at her, trying to remember the person I had fallen in love with. But all I could see now was the betrayal, the lies, the months of deceit. The image of her with Greg burned in my mind, erasing any semblance of sympathy I might have once had. "There's nothing to fix, Simone," I said, my voice cold. "You made your choices. You decided this wasn't worth fighting for." Tears streamed down her face as she stood up, crossing the room toward me. "No, Jonathan, I was lost. I didn't know how to deal with how distant we'd become. But I love you. You're the one I want to be with. Please, just give me a chance to make things right." I held up a hand to stop her from coming any closer. "You don't get to play the victim here, Simone. You lied to me. You brought him into our home, our bed. You've been sneaking around behind my back for months, and now you want me to pretend it didn't happen?" She looked devastated, her hands shaking as she reached for me again. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but I swear, I'll end it. I'll never see him again. Just don't walk away from us." I shook my head, the anger rising again. "Us? There is no us anymore. You killed at the moment you chose him over me." Simone sobbed harder, sinking to the floor, pleading with me between gasps. "Don't throw this away. We can go to counseling. We can figure this out. Please, Jonathan, please." I couldn't take it anymore. Her tears, her begging. It was all too much. I had given her everything, trusted her with my heart, and she had thrown it back in my face. I had nothing left to give. "I've already filed for divorce," I said quietly, my words cutting through the silence like a blade. Simone froze, her eyes wide with shock. "What? No. No, you didn't. You can't." "I did," I said, my voice firmer this time. "It's over, Simone. I'm done." She scrambled to her feet, panic setting in. "You can't do this. We've been together for 7 years. You can't just walk away like this." I met her gaze, unflinching. "I'm not the one who walked away, Simone. You did that a long time ago." She collapsed onto the couch, her sobs filling the room as I turned and walked down the hall. I headed for the bedroom, grabbing a suitcase from the closet and throwing my clothes into it. I could hear Simone crying, her voice pleading for me to reconsider, but I had made up my mind. There was no going back. I packed up everything I needed, clothes, toiletries, my phone charger, and zipped up the suitcase. As I headed toward the door, Simone appeared in the hallway, her face streaked with tears. "Jonathan, please, don't leave me." I stopped for a moment, looking at her one last time. The woman I had built my life around, the woman I thought I would grow old with, was now just a stranger. A stranger who had broken me in ways I didn't think were possible. "I'm sorry, Simone," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But this is goodbye." I walked out the door, closing it behind me. As I stepped outside, the weight of the last few days finally hit me. I was free, but I was also lost. Everything I thought I knew about love, about trust, had been shattered. And now, I had to figure out how to rebuild my life from the ground up. As I drove away from the house, the silence in the car was deafening. The reality of what had just happened started to sink in, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. Simone and I were done. And while the pain of betrayal still gnawed at my heart, there was also a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer. Every corner of it held memories of a life that no longer existed. The laughter, the intimate moments, the dreams we had shared. They were all tainted now, poisoned by the knowledge of what Simone had done. I needed space, distance, time to figure out who I was without her. I found myself driving toward the edge of town, away from the familiar streets and places we had once visited together. I kept driving until I reached a small motel just off the highway. It wasn't much, but it was enough. A place to lay low for the night while I processed everything. I checked in, tossed my suitcase on the bed, and collapsed into the worn-out armchair by the window. I stared out at the empty parking lot, my mind racing with questions. What had gone so wrong? Had I missed something? Could I have done more to stop this? Or had Simone always been this way, and I had just been blind to it? It was hard to say. All I knew was that I felt hollow, like the man I used to be had been carved out, leaving nothing behind but an empty shell. I thought about calling someone, maybe my brother, maybe a friend, but I couldn't bring myself to explain what had happened. Not yet. The humiliation of being cheated on, the betrayal, it all felt too raw, too personal to share with anyone. So, I sat there, alone with my thoughts, letting the silence fill the room. Hours passed, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the exhaustion began to catch up with me. I hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, but I was too tired to do either. I kicked off my shoes and lay down on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. How had my life gone from being so perfect to this? How had everything fallen apart so quickly? I closed my eyes, hoping for sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. I kept replaying the moment I had walked in on them, the look on Simone's face when she realized she'd been caught. Her tears, her pleas, they felt like they belonged to another world now, a world I was no longer part of. I had moved on from that moment, but the pain lingered, sharp and unforgiving. Eventually, I drifted off, though my sleep was restless and filled with fragmented dreams. I woke up several times throughout the night, my heart pounding, as if my subconscious couldn't let go of the turmoil. By the time morning came, I was more exhausted than when I'd gone to bed. But with the dawn came a sense of resolution. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. Filing for divorce, walking away from Simone. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the most necessary. Now, I had to figure out what came next. How do you rebuild your life after something like this? I got out of bed and splashed water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me seemed like a stranger, someone who had aged years in just a few days. But beneath the fatigue, beneath the pain, there was a spark of determination. I wasn't going to let this break me. I packed up my things and left the motel, heading for my car. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew I needed to keep moving. I couldn't let this betrayal define me. I had to take control of my life again, to figure out who I was without Simone, without the weight of her lies dragging me down. As I got into the car, I pulled out my phone. Dozens of missed calls and texts from Simone filled the screen, but I ignored them. I wasn't ready to talk to her, to face her pleas for forgiveness. Not yet. I needed time. Time to heal. Time to think. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, the road ahead uncertain, but mine to navigate. The road stretched out before me, open and unfamiliar. I had no destination in mind, but that didn't matter. For the first time in days, I felt like I was in control. Each mile I put between me and the house, between me and Simone, seemed to ease the weight on my chest. I wasn't running away, I told myself. I was taking a step forward, away from the betrayal, away from the memories. But as much as I tried to convince myself, the truth lingered just beneath the surface. I wasn't just driving away from Simone. I was driving away from the life I thought I had. I stopped at a small diner a few towns over, the kind of place that looked like it hadn't changed in decades. I needed coffee, something to shake off the fog of exhaustion. The place was nearly empty, save for an old couple sitting in the corner, quietly sipping their drinks. I took a seat at the counter, trying to clear my mind. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, brought me a cup of coffee and smiled. "Rough night?" she asked, her voice gentle but knowing. I gave her a tight smile. "You could say that." She nodded. as if she understood without needing to hear the details. "Coffee helps," she said, pouring a fresh cup, "but talking helps more." I shook my head. "Not today." She gave me a soft pat on the arm before moving on, and I was grateful she didn't push. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone, not even a stranger. I just needed a moment to breathe, to figure out my next move. As I sat there, sipping my coffee, my mind drifted back to the night before. The look on Simone's face when I told her it was over. The shock, the desperation. It still haunted me. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, to believe that she truly regretted what she'd done. But the other part of me, the part that had seen the videos, that had watched her betray me over and over again, knew better. People don't just accidentally fall into affairs. It's a choice she made repeatedly. And now, she was trying to make me believe that one tear-filled apology could fix everything. No. I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away. There was no going back, no fixing this. The divorce was in motion, and I wasn't going to let myself get dragged into the mess again. I had given her all the chances in the world, and she had thrown them away. I finished my coffee, left a tip on the counter, and headed back to my car. I still didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't just sit around waiting for my life to fall back into place. I needed a plan, something to focus on. Maybe work would be a good distraction. I hadn't taken any time off yet, and throwing myself into my job might help me forget about everything that had happened. But as I drove, the thought of going back to the same routine, the same life I had built with Simone, felt impossible. I couldn't go back to normal because there was no normal anymore. Everything had changed. I decided to call my brother, Mark. He was the only person I could talk to right now, the only one who knew me well enough to understand what I was going through. I hadn't told him about Simone yet, but I knew I needed to. The phone rang a few times before he picked up. "Hey man, what's up?" "Hey," I said, my voice rough. I need to talk to you about something." There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear the concern in his voice when he spoke again. "What's going on? You sound off." "I left Simone," I said, the words feeling heavier than I expected. "I caught her cheating. It's been going on for months." Mark didn't say anything for a moment, and when he did, his voice was steady, calm. "Jesus, Jonathan. I'm sorry. Are you okay?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Not really, but I'm trying to be. Do you want me to come over? We can talk, grab a beer, whatever you need. I'm not home right now. I'm just driving. I don't know where I'm going yet." "Take your time, man," he said, his voice filled with understanding. "But when you're ready, you've got a place here. You don't have to go through this alone." I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that until the relief washed over me. "Thanks, Mark. I'll figure something out." We hung up, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel completely lost. I wasn't alone. I had people who cared about me, who would help me get through this. And even though the road ahead felt uncertain, I knew I would find my way eventually. For now, that was enough. I drove for hours after talking to Mark, my thoughts swirling as the scenery blurred past. It was comforting to know I had somewhere to go if I needed it, but for now, I wasn't ready to see anyone, to face the questions, the looks of sympathy. I needed to process everything on my own terms. Eventually, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a small motel again. This time, I wasn't running from anything. I just needed a place to stop and think. I checked in, tossed my bag on the bed, and sank into the armchair by the window. The silence of the room felt both oppressive and comforting. No more Simone, no more lies, just me and my thoughts. I sat there for a while, staring out the window at the empty parking lot, wondering what my next move would be. The divorce was in motion, but it felt like there was still so much unfinished business. I hadn't spoken to Simone since I left, and part of me knew that I would have to face her again at some point. But the thought of it made my stomach turn. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the countless missed messages from her. Each one was a variation of the same theme. Apologies, promises to change, desperate pleas for another chance. But the one thing that stood out to me was the same message she'd sent at least a dozen times. It didn't mean anything. Those words made my blood boil. It didn't mean anything? How could she say that? How could months of lying, sneaking around, and betraying me not mean anything? It was as if she was trying to minimize what she had done, as if that would somehow make the hurt go away. I tossed the phone onto the bed, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me again. Maybe I should have blocked her. Maybe I should have cut her off completely, but a part of me couldn't do it. Not yet. I needed closure. I needed answers. I pulled out my laptop and opened the video file I had recorded. I had avoided watching it since that night, but now I felt compelled to see it again. Maybe I was looking for something, some clue, some sign that I had missed, some explanation for why Simone had done what she did. As the video played, I watched Simone and Greg together, laughing, kissing, completely oblivious to the destruction they were causing. My hands clenched into fists as I forced myself to watch. It felt like I was watching a stranger. This wasn't the woman I had married, the woman I had built my life with. This was someone else, someone capable of hurting me in ways I hadn't thought possible. When the video ended, I slammed the laptop shut and leaned back in the chair, my mind racing. I had my proof. I had the evidence. But it didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it made everything worse. Because now I had to face the truth. Simone wasn't the person I thought she was. And maybe she never had been. A knock on the door pulled me out of my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door to find the motel manager standing there, holding a piece of paper. "Sorry to bother you, sir," he said, offering an apologetic smile. "You've got a delivery." "A delivery?" I asked, confused. He handed me the paper, and my heart sank when I saw what it was: divorce papers. It seemed that Simone had beaten me to it. I thanked the manager and closed the door, staring at the papers in my hand. I should have felt relieved. After all, this was what I wanted, right? The end of our marriage, the severing of all ties. But as I sat down and read through the documents, I realized that the finality of it all was hitting me harder than I expected. It was over. Truly over. There was no turning back now. Simone and I were finished. I sat there for a long time, staring at the papers, trying to reconcile the emotions swirling inside me. The anger, the hurt, the sense of loss. It was all still there, but beneath it, something else was beginning to take root. Acceptance. This was the end of one chapter of my life, but it wasn't the end of me. I would move on. I would rebuild. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but I had to believe that there was something better waiting for me on the other side of this. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the messages again, finally blocking Simone's number. I couldn't let her have any more power over me. Not now, not ever. I put the papers aside and stood up, looking out the window at the horizon. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could face it. And I would. On my own terms. With the divorce papers sitting on the table in front of me, reality had officially set in. It was over. The life I had built with Simone, the future we had planned. It all crumbled into a heap of legal jargon and signatures. But as final as it felt, there was an odd sense of calm that began to settle over me. Maybe it was the knowledge that I was taking control again. I was no longer a victim in Simone's web of lies. I was deciding what came next. I packed up my things, checked out of the motel, and hit the road once more. This time, though, I wasn't driving aimlessly. I was heading toward a place I hadn't been in years, a cabin my parents owned on the outskirts of a small town. It was a place I used to go to as a kid, back when life was simple, back when I hadn't yet learned how complicated relationships could be. The cabin was about 4 hours away, but the drive was exactly what I needed. The farther I got from the city, the more I felt like I could breathe again. There was no rush to return to my old life. In fact, I wasn't sure what that life even looked like anymore. Without Simone, without the routine we'd fallen into, everything felt wide open. And as terrifying as that was, it was also liberating. By the time I arrived at the cabin, the sun was beginning to dip below the trees, casting long shadows across the dirt road. The cabin itself was rustic, a little rundown from years of neglect, but it still felt like a sanctuary. I parked the car, grabbed my bag, and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar smell of wood and earth. It wasn't much, but it was mine for now. A place to think, to heal, to figure out what came next. I spent the next few hours cleaning up, dusting off old furniture, and getting the place in some kind of livable shape. As the night settled in, I built a fire in the stone fireplace, the crackle of the flames filling the silence. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to relax. I wasn't running anymore. I was here, in the quiet, with nothing but my thoughts. Sitting there, staring into the fire, I couldn't help but think about how much had changed. Just weeks ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I had a wife, a home, a life that seemed stable, even if it had grown a little distant. Now, all of that was gone. It was hard to process, hard to understand how everything could fall apart so quickly. But the truth was, it hadn't been quick. Simone's affair had been going on for months, maybe longer, and I had been blind to it. Or maybe I had just chosen not to see. I sighed, leaning back in the chair. My phone buzzed on the table next to me, and for a moment, I felt a spike of anxiety. It was probably another text from Simone, or maybe Greg, trying to explain or apologize. But when I picked it up, I was relieved to see it was a message from Mark. Mark asterisk, "Hey man, just checking in. How are you holding up?" I stared at the message for a moment before typing a reply. Me asterisk, "I'm okay. Just needed some space. I'm at the cabin." His response came almost immediately. Mark asterisk, "Good call. That place has always been your go-to. You need anything?" I thought about it for a second, then replied. Me asterisk, "Not right now. Just trying to figure things out." Mark asterisk, "Take your time. You know I'm here when you're ready." I put the phone down, grateful for the simplicity of his support. Mark had always been the steady one, the one who didn't push or pry, but was always there when I needed him. It was comforting to know that even in the midst of all this chaos, I wasn't truly alone. The fire crackled, and I let the warmth soothe me as I closed my eyes, letting the events of the past few days wash over me. I had been so caught up in the betrayal, the anger, that I hadn't allowed myself to really grieve for what I had lost. It wasn't just Simone I was losing. It was the life we had built together, the dreams we had shared, the future I had imagined for us. But that future didn't exist anymore. And now, it was time to figure out what my new future would look like. Without Simone, without the lies. As the fire began to die down, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I would start fresh. No more looking back, no more replaying the moments of betrayal in my head. It was time to focus on me, on what I wanted, on what came next. Simone was part of my past, but she wouldn't define my future. With that thought in mind, I went to bed, feeling more at peace than I had in days. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, I was ready to face it. The morning brought with it a strange sense of calm. Waking up in the cabin, surrounded by nothing but the sound of birds and the rustling of leaves, felt like a kind of reset button on my life. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no rush, no pressure, no Simone, just the quiet and the promise of a new day. I made myself a cup of coffee and stepped outside onto the porch, feeling the cool morning air against my skin. The cabin overlooked a small, peaceful lake, and the water shimmered in the early light. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still, where the chaos of the world couldn't reach you. As I sipped my coffee, my mind wandered back to the divorce papers. The legal process had started, but emotionally, I knew there was still a long way to go. Simone's betrayal had cut deep, but now that I was away from her, away from the lies, I could finally start to breathe again. The anger, though still there, was no longer overwhelming. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected: acceptance. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would still be difficult days ahead, but I was starting to accept that my life was changing. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. I had been clinging to the idea of what Simone and I used to be for so long that I hadn't realized how much we had already drifted apart. The person I had fallen in love with years ago wasn't the same person who had betrayed me, and I wasn't the same person either. I spent the day hiking through the woods, letting nature clear my mind. The physical exertion felt good, my body working through the tension that had built up over weeks of stress. With every step, I felt a little bit lighter, a little more grounded. The woods were a place where I could just be. No expectations, no demands. Just the sound of my footsteps on the forest floor, the smell of pine trees, and the occasional call of a distant bird. By the time I returned to the cabin in the late afternoon, I felt more at peace than I had in a long time. I made a simple dinner and sat by the fire again, letting the crackling flames soothe the last bits of tension from my body. For the first time since discovering Simone's affair, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I could gain. After dinner, I pulled out my phone and hesitated for a moment. I hadn't checked my messages all day, but I knew I couldn't avoid Simone forever. I needed to deal with the situation head-on if I was going to truly move on. When I unlocked my phone, there were more messages than I could count. Some from Simone, a few from Greg, and one from a number I didn't recognize. I ignored most of them and focused on the latest one from Simone. Simone asterisk, I don't know what else to say. I'm sorry. I know you probably hate me, and I deserve it. But I love you, Jonathan. I made a mistake, but I still love you. Please just talk to me. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Did she really think that love could fix this? That after everything she had done, everything I had seen, I would just take her back? Part of me wanted to respond, to give her the closure she was asking for, but the other part of me knew that there was nothing left to say. Instead, I deleted the message. I scrolled through the rest, but one message caught my eye, the one from the unknown number. I clicked on it, feeling a flicker of curiosity. Unknown asterisk, Jonathan, it's Greg. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to talk to you. Please, just once. I felt my jaw clench. The nerve of him. After everything he'd done, after sneaking around with my wife, he had the audacity to think we could have a conversation? I couldn't believe it. I started to delete his message too, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the need for closure. Maybe it was the desire to hear his excuses and tear them apart. Or maybe it was just morbid curiosity. Either way, I didn't delete the message. Not yet. Instead, I put my phone down and sat back in the chair, staring into the fire. Would hearing Greg out give me any kind of peace? Or would it just drag me back into the pain I was trying to escape? I wasn't sure, but part of me was tempted to find out. I had come here to move on, to clear my head, and yet here I was, faced with the very thing I was trying to leave behind. I went to bed that night, the weight of the decision heavy on my mind. Should I talk to him? Or was I better off leaving the past where it belonged, behind me? As I drifted off to sleep, I knew that the next step in my journey wasn't going to be as easy as I had hoped. But one thing was certain, I was ready to face whatever came next. The next morning, I woke up with Greg's message still on my mind. The thought of speaking to him made my stomach turn, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe hearing him out would give me some kind of closure. I wasn't looking for an apology. It was too late for that. But maybe, just maybe, I'd understand why he did what he did. Why Simone chose him. I sat on the porch with my coffee, staring at the lake, trying to make sense of it all. Part of me wanted to ignore Greg's message, to block his number and never think about him again. But another part of me, the part that needed answers, couldn't let it go. I needed to know why. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my phone and typed a response. Me asterisk, what do you want, Greg? I hit send and immediately regretted it. But it was done. I'd opened the door to a conversation I wasn't sure I was ready to have. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with his reply. Greg asterisk, I just want to explain. Can we meet? I know I don't deserve it, but I need to talk to you. Meeting him in person? The thought made my skin crawl. The last thing I wanted was to see his face, but I knew that if I didn't confront him now, the questions would continue to haunt me. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, but eventually, I typed out a reply. Me asterisk fine. Where? He responded quickly, suggesting a coffee shop in town. I agreed, but I made sure to pick a time when the place would be quiet, with as few people around as possible. I didn't want an audience for what was bound to be an uncomfortable conversation. As the day went on, I tried to distract myself by going for another hike, but my mind kept returning to the upcoming meeting. What was I hoping to gain from this? Was I expecting some kind of explanation that would make everything better? Or was this just about confronting the man who had torn my life apart? By the time I arrived at the coffee shop, I still didn't have the answers. I spotted Greg sitting at a table in the back, his expression tense as he glanced around nervously. Seeing him in person brought a fresh wave of anger bubbling to the surface, but I forced myself to keep it in check. This wasn't about losing control. This was about getting answers. I walked over to the table, and Greg stood up awkwardly, his hand halfway extended before he realized I wasn't going to shake it. He dropped it back to his side and gestured for me to sit. I did. My eyes locked on his, waiting for him to speak. "Thanks for meeting me," he started, his voice hesitant. I know you don't owe me anything, but he trailed off, fumbling for words. "What do you want to say, Greg?" I asked, my voice flat. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry, Jonathan. I know that doesn't mean much, but I am. What happened with Simone? It wasn't supposed to go this far." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my anger in check. "So what, Greg? You're saying it just happened? Like it was some kind of accident?" He shook his head quickly. "No, it wasn't an accident. I know that. I just mean, I never meant to hurt you. Simone and he stopped, taking a deep breath. "We got close at work. At first, it was just talking, confiding in each other about things going on in our lives. But then it got more serious, and I didn't stop it. I should have, but I didn't." I stared at him, my fists clenched under the table. "And you didn't think to back off when you realized she was married? When you realized you were destroying someone else's life?" Greg swallowed hard, his face pale. "I didn't think, Jonathan. I was selfish. I know that. But I never wanted to take her from you." "Well, congratulations," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You managed to destroy my marriage without even trying." He flinched at my words, guilt flashing across his face. "I deserve that. I know I do. But I just wanted you to know, it wasn't about you. It wasn't because you did something wrong." I felt a bitter laugh escape my throat. "You think that makes this better? You think knowing that my wife cheated on me because she was bored, or because you were convenient makes it any easier to swallow?" He lowered his head, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I didn't mean to make it worse. I'm sorry." I shook my head, the anger bubbling up again. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Greg. Sorry doesn't undo what you and Simone did." He looked up at me, desperation in his eyes. "I know it doesn't. I know nothing I say can make this right. But I swear, I didn't want it to end like this. I didn't want to destroy everything." I stood up, pushing the chair back with a loud scrape. "Well, you did. And now you have to live with it." I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Greg sitting there, looking as lost and broken as I had felt when I first found out about the affair. But as I stepped outside, breathing in the fresh air, I realized something. For the first time since this nightmare started, I didn't feel weighed down by anger or confusion. I had faced Greg, and I had gotten my answers. And while they didn't make everything better, they gave me something I hadn't had before: closure. Now, it was time to move on. Walking away from that coffee shop felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. For weeks, I had been consumed by the betrayal, anger, and questions that had haunted me since I discovered the affair. Meeting with Greg, hearing his weak explanations, and confronting him directly, it didn't fix everything, but it gave me something to hold on to. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like I had regained control over my own life. As I drove back toward the cabin, I couldn't help but replay the conversation in my mind. Greg's apologies, his pathetic attempts to explain why it had happened, didn't mean much to me, but at least now I had the closure I needed. I had heard it straight from the source. There was no grand reason behind Simone's betrayal, no hidden meaning. It was just selfishness, weakness, and poor choices. I could accept that now. I could accept that Simone wasn't the person I thought she was, and that the future we had planned together no longer existed. What mattered now was how I was going to rebuild my life without her. When I arrived back at the cabin, the sun was starting to set, casting a golden glow across the lake. I stood on the porch for a while, watching the water ripple in the breeze. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm that had been raging inside me for so long. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I could finally breathe. I went inside and made myself a simple dinner, the routine of cooking calming my nerves. As I sat at the small kitchen table, Eating in the quiet of the cabin, I realized how much I had been holding onto the idea of my old life. The life I had shared with Simone, the future we had planned. It was all gone now, and that was okay. It was time to let it go and start focusing on what came next. After dinner, I pulled out my phone and checked my messages. As expected, there were more missed calls and texts from Simone, but I didn't bother reading them. Whatever she had to say didn't matter anymore. She had made her choices, and now I was making mine. I sent a quick text to my brother, letting him know that I had met with Greg and that things had gone as expected. Mark responded almost immediately, offering his support and reminding me that I didn't have to go through this alone. It was comforting to know he was there for me, but for now, I needed time to process everything on my own. The next morning, I woke up feeling more rested than I had in weeks. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and for the first time, I didn't wake up with a knot of anxiety in my chest. I felt lighter, clearer, more focused on what came next. I decided to spend the day working on the cabin, fixing up the place, and getting it into better shape. There was something therapeutic about using my hands, about creating order out of the chaos. I patched up a few leaks, repaired some of the old furniture, and even cleared out some of the overgrown bushes around the property. By the time the sun started to set, I was exhausted, but it was a good kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from hard work and progress. As I sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the lake, I thought about the future. For so long, my life had been wrapped up in Simone, our plans, our marriage, our future. But now, it was time to start thinking about what I wanted. What kind of life did I want to build for myself? Where did I want to go from here? The possibilities were endless, and for the first time, that didn't scare me. It excited me. I wasn't tied down anymore. I was free to start over, to rebuild my life on my own terms. I wasn't naive. I knew it would take time to fully heal, to move past the hurt and the betrayal. But now, I felt like I had the strength to do it. I had faced the hardest parts already, the lies, the betrayal, the confrontation, and I had come out the other side stronger. That night, as I sat by the fire, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let Simone or Greg or the pain of the past define me anymore. I would move forward. I would rebuild. And I would find happiness again, on my own terms. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful, and that was enough. The next few days at the cabin passed in a blur of quiet moments and self-reflection. I spent my time working around the property, enjoying the solitude and the sense of peace that came with it. It felt good to be away from everything, to just focus on myself for a change. No distractions, no drama. Just me, the lake, and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. I thought a lot about what my life would look like moving forward. In the past, every decision I made had been intertwined with Simone. Our plans, our future, had been so deeply connected that I had never really thought about what I wanted on my own. But now, that was the only question that mattered. What did I want? As I sat by the lake one afternoon, the answer started to become clearer. I wanted to rebuild, but not just in a literal sense. I wanted to rebuild myself, to rediscover the things that made me happy, the things I had set aside while I was wrapped up in my marriage. It was time to focus on my own dreams, my own goals, and to stop looking back. I decided I would start by taking a break from everything. I had been going non-stop for years, work, marriage, the stress of life. But now, I had the opportunity to step back and breathe. I'd take a leave from work, travel a little, maybe even spend some time figuring out a new career path. The idea of shaking up my life like that would have terrified me before, but now it felt like the only way forward. One morning, I made the decision to start putting my plan into action. I called my boss and explained the situation, without the messy details, of course, and requested some extended time off. He was understanding, offering his support and assuring me that my position would be waiting for me when I was ready to return. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time, I was free to live life on my terms. With that decision made, I started making preparations. I packed up a few essentials from the cabin, leaving the rest behind for now. The cabin would still be here when I needed it, a retreat for whenever I felt like I needed to escape the chaos of the world. But now, it was time to move on. As I prepared to leave, I took one last walk around the lake. The reflection of the trees on the water, the crisp air, the tranquility of the place. It had been exactly what I needed to clear my mind and heart. But now it was time to face the world again, with a new perspective. Before heading out, I made one final decision. I unblocked Simone's number, not to re-engage with her, but to send her a message that would offer me true closure. It wasn't long or emotional, just simple and to the point. I hope you find whatever you were looking for. I'm moving on. Goodbye, Simone. I hit send, knowing it would be the last communication I'd ever have with her. There were no more questions, no more lingering doubts. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. It was time to leave the past behind. As I drove away from the cabin, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. The road stretched out before me, open and full of possibilities. I didn't know where I was heading yet, but for the first time, that didn't scare me. It excited me. I had no plans, no roadmap, just a sense of determination to figure out who I was without the weight of betrayal holding me down. Maybe I'd travel, maybe I'd explore new hobbies, or maybe I'd just spend some time rediscovering the things that had brought me joy before everything had gotten so complicated. But wherever I went, one thing was certain. I was no longer defined by Simone's actions or by the life we had once shared. I was free to create my own path, and that was something no one could take away from me. As I merged onto the highway, the sun rising ahead of me, I smiled to myself. This was the start of something new, something better, and I was ready for it. The highway stretched out before me, miles of open road leading to a future I couldn't yet picture but was eager to embrace. There was something liberating about not having a plan. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about the next step, the next milestone, or the expectations that came with marriage and stability. All I knew was that I was moving forward, and that was enough. The days turned into weeks as I drove from town to town, exploring places I'd never been. I stopped at quiet little coffee shops, wandered through small towns, and hiked in national parks that made me feel connected to something bigger than myself. Nature had a way of reminding me that life moved on, that no matter how painful things got, there was always a way forward. During my travels, I kept in touch with Mark, checking in every now and then to let him know I was okay. He was a constant source of support, but he never pushed me to come back or deal with things faster than I was ready. He understood that I needed this time to heal, to figure out what I wanted my life to look like from here on out. Occasionally, I'd think about Simone, not in the way I used to, no longer consumed by the betrayal or the pain. Instead, I thought about how much we had changed, how our paths had diverged long before her affair ever came to light. In a strange way, I began to feel grateful. If she hadn't betrayed me, I might never have realized how far I had strayed from who I really was. I had always been the kind of person who put others first, my career, my marriage, my responsibilities. But now, for the first time in years, I was focusing on myself. And it felt good. It felt right. A few months into my travels, I found myself in a small mountain town that I instantly connected with. It was quiet but filled with charm, local shops, friendly people, and an art scene that piqued my interest. It was the kind of place where you could lose track of time and just be. No stress, no pressure. I decided to stay for a while, renting a small cabin on the edge of town. It was here that I started to rediscover my passions. I picked up painting again, something I hadn't done since college, and found solace in creating something beautiful out of the chaos that had once consumed my life. I spent my days exploring the mountains, taking in the fresh air, and my nights working on my art, letting the brushstrokes express the emotions I still struggled to put into words. As the months passed, I felt myself healing in ways I hadn't thought possible. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. The betrayal that had once defined me was now just a part of my story, not the whole of it. I had grown stronger, more self-aware, and more in tune with what I truly wanted out of life. I met new people along the way, some who became friends, others who were just passing through like me. But I no longer felt the need to explain my past or dwell on what had happened. I had made peace with it. Simone was a chapter in my life, but I had turned the page, and the new chapter was entirely mine to write. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch of my rented cabin, I received a text from Mark. He asked if I was planning to come back home anytime soon, or if I had decided to make this little town my permanent residence. I laughed to myself, realizing that the idea of home had changed for me. I wasn't sure if I'd go back to the city, or if this town in the mountains would become my new home, but for the first time, the choice was mine to make. I replied to Mark, letting him know I'd visit soon, but that for now, I was exactly where I needed to be. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, I realized how far I had come. The man who had left that broken home after discovering the affair was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, someone more self-assured, someone who had learned the hard way that sometimes the greatest pain can lead to the greatest growth. I wasn't sure where the road would take me next, but one thing was certain. I was ready for whatever came my way. Life, with all its unpredictability and challenges, was something I could now face with open arms. I smiled to myself as the cool mountain breeze swept through the trees. The past was behind me, the future was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Have you ever gone through a transformation after a difficult time? How did you find your path forward? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one.